As an administrator of Windows 10, the following are probably the sorts of things that you'll spend your time doing: configuring services, configuring devices through Device Manager, automating some of these procedures by using Task Scheduler, monitoring and managing printers, and configuring indexing options. To configure services, you'll probably use the Services snap-in in Management Console. Just type services.msc at the command prompt or in the Run box. From here, you can view the properties of a service by right-clicking it and choosing Properties. You can then control its behavior. You can set the startup type to automatic if it always needs to start when Windows starts, or manual if you want it to start only when needed. If the service is currently running and you want to stop it, you can use these control buttons under Service Status. You can also use the following command line tools. netstart. If you use it without any parameters, it shows you a list of the running services. If you specify a particular named service, if the service isn't running, it's started. Conversely, the netstop command allows you to stop a named running service. scquery lists all services. scstop can be used to stop a named service, whilst scstart can be used to start one. You can also use Windows PowerShell. The getService commandlet displays available services. You can see an example here: getService and then the pipe, where object, and then in squiggly brackets the query that says, essentially, if it's running. So this will show you a list of all of the running services. Stop a named service by using the stop service commandlet and then the -name parameter and then the name of the service. Conversely, you can start it with the start service commandlet. Restart a service is helpful if you're troubleshooting, so obviously it stops the service and then starts the service. And then if you want to change the properties of a service, you can use the set service commandlet. The system configuration tool can also be used to configure selective startup of services. So you can configure the computer to start up with a reduced set of system services for troubleshooting purposes. We've already seen Device Manager in the course, but you can use this to troubleshoot and configure your devices. Task Scheduler allows you to configure a number of tasks to run on a periodic basis. You can configure some quite fine detail. Typically, you'll use a task to launch a script or to perform some sort of action. It means that on a regular basis you can perform specific tasks, administrative tasks, without needing to remember to do them. A typical task will consist of a number of properties: run only when the user is logged on, or run whether the user is logged on or not, or run in a certain context of a particular user, and then the triggers, in other words, what it is we're looking for. It might be a time trigger, or it might be some sort of activity on the computer, and then what will happen on the Actions tab, and then conditions that need to be met for the action to be performed, and so on. We'll take a look at that shortly in a demonstration. Most users will have a printer, and interestingly enough, spending your time fixing printers is not an uncommon task for an administrator. It tends to be that there's a lot of trouble with print devices. So using the print management console here is something you might spend a bit of time doing. It's quite a useful console as it consolidates all of the print drivers and devices on a particular computer and provides them in a ready-to-access list. And at a glance, you can see what's going on. And so, for example, you can see most of the way down this list here, we have an NPI 86DC 93 HP LaserJet Professional in the middle of deleting a job. And occasionally you might need to configure indexing options. Windows 10 accesses file contents from the storage devices that are connected to a Windows 10 computer. You can improve the speed of access when you're looking for an object, for a file object, for example, by indexing where that object is stored. You can use the indexing options feature within Control Panel to control what is indexed. In the demonstration, we'll see how to configure services, configure Device Manager, create tasks in Task Scheduler, monitor and manage printers, and configure indexing options. There are a number of different ways to manage services. Most of the time, you'll probably use the Services Management Console snap-in. You can run that, as I just did, services.msc, or you can use Computer Management. Let's open up Computer Management, and you can then access services and applications down here. So it's the same. you can see that there's a list of services running alphabetically here, and the status running or otherwise not, and you can locate the service that you're interested in, for example DNS client, and you can view its properties, and you can configure the startup type to automatic delayed start, automatic, manual or disabled. So essentially the two things you're likely to do is to leave it as it is or to set it to disable because you don't want it to run. That would generally be the typical behavior. Some services require logon information. Again, that's not something you typically spend your time configuring. It's more usual to turn off a service or to turn it back on again. If a service is currently running and you want to stop it, you can click stop. If it's not running and you want to start it, you can click start. So it's fairly straightforward. If you're interested in those services of a particular startup type, you can click the list here to shuffle it into that order. You can also use a number of command line tools. Open up the command prompt, Elevated, and then I can use the SC query tool. So the SC query state equals all shows me all of the available services. I can scroll back and see what these are, and then we can use the SC stop and SC start commands to stop or start processes or services. In addition to that, we can also use the net start command line tool. That by itself shows you all of the available services, and then you can choose net start to start a specific service or net stop to stop a particular service. You can also use Windows PowerShell commandlets. I'll open up an elevated Windows PowerShell window, and then I can use the get service commandlet to list all of the available services, whether they're running or not. And clearly I can be more specific and look for those that are running or those that are not running or those that are disabled. And then I can use the stop service and start service commandlets to stop and start services. So there's a number of different ways you can manage services depending on what's appropriate for you. Generally, most administrators tend to use the services snap-in for local service administration and probably use Windows PowerShell to manage things remotely. From time to time, you might want to configure your computer to start up with different services than usual. You may want to perform a selective startup. You can do that using the system configuration tool. You see here that you can enable a normal startup, which is everything starting and loading in its default behavior. You can also choose a selective startup and then specify that you want to load system services and load startup items or not. You can also use the boot tab here to specify to start up in safe mode, and then you can select a different safe mode. We'll talk a bit more about the recovery options in Windows 10 in a later session. You can also have a look at all of the available services and see which ones are running and which ones are not running, and then you can enable or disable some of those services. You can hide all Microsoft services, so you can just look at third parties, there are none here, and make a change accordingly. So that's a useful way of making a temporary change. So if I enable safe boot, for example, then that will change the behavior to a selective startup and only load certain items. I'll click cancel on that. Managing devices is done through Device Manager. I find the quickest way to locate that is to right click start and choose Device Manager, but again it's also in Computer Management. And then, as we've seen before, you can select the appropriate device and update the driver, uninstall the device, change the properties of the device. If you've updated the driver, you can use the rollback driver option. If it's available, then that means you've updated the driver. If it's not, then you haven't. Some devices allow you to perform more advanced management, depending on what they are. I've got some options here for power management, for example, for this particular device. And for some of the network adapters, there are some advanced properties as well. Some of these enable some of the advanced networking features, probably outside the scope of the course to go into that right now. But what I'm suggesting is that the options that you have vary depending on the type of the device. So pretty much everything can be done through Device Manager in terms of managing devices. If you have an administrative task that you want to perform on a regular basis, you can use the task scheduler for that. The easiest way to get into the task scheduler is to open up Computer Management and then click on the task schedule node. You've got a list of tasks. There's only one here at the moment. It's a OneDrive standalone update process. But you can create a task over here by clicking Create Task, or Create Basic Task if it's a fairly simple thing that you're doing. And we'll give it a name. Test task. We're going to look for a condition, so we're going to say a daily, weekly, monthly type of thing. So we'll say daily. On daily, how often and when do we start and when do we finish? So we'll say it's going to be on the 20th of March at 1:57:49 a.m. and will recur every 1 day. What are we going to do? We're going to send an email or we're going to display a message. Both of those features are deprecated, means not really supported any longer. They still function, but it's to be discouraged. So instead we're going to start a program, and then we can specify what program it is that we want it to run. It might be a script that does something or other, or it might simply be a particular management tool. I'll choose anything. It doesn't really matter for demonstration purposes. So I'll just have it open Notepad, which I admit is somewhat curious, and then click Next. And then this is a summary. I might want to do some more advanced edits to the task, so I can click Open the Properties when I click Finish, and you'll see that it brings up the properties of my task. And then I can go through and verify, is there anything about this task that I need to change? So, for example, can the task run within the security context of the user account that set up the task? That's Andrew in this case, but I might need to change that to an administrative user. Only run it when the user's logged on or not. Run with the highest privileges that the user account has. Modify or update the triggers, so I can specify additional triggers if I want to. So at the moment it runs daily, but I may also want it to run weekly. What's it going to do? I can verify the conditions. So here we've got start the task only if the computer's on battery, and stop if it switches to battery power. So I can configure that behavior there, and so on. So there are a range of advanced properties I can configure. Another fairly common task for administrators is managing printers. Windows 10 provides the print management tool for that. We get a list of the available printers and the drivers. So these are some built-in printers. I've also got a LaserJet connection and available drivers. So if I want to view the properties of a particular driver or remove the driver package because it's a problem, I can do that here without having to go to the specific printer. I can see if there are any printers that are currently not ready, or if there are any printers with jobs that are waiting to be serviced. Print servers. A print server is the term used to describe a device which is sharing its printers. And I can have a look at the local computer here and add or remove other remote print servers here. And then I can have a look at the printers that are available on each of those devices. So there's quite a lot you can do within this consolidated interface for managing printers. To help with searches, Windows 10 indexes some commonly used data areas and program areas. You can manage indexing options by opening the Indexing Options tool from Control Panel, and you can see which are the included locations for indexing purposes. It's looking in the Start menu. It's for programs. It's looking in the Users area for data. But you can then modify that if you want. So it's specifying, it's indexing the program files x86 Microsoft Office folder. So that's indexing Office components. It's also indexing the offline files component. But I can specify other subfolders if I want to for indexing. So if you index a folder, then its content can be searched and located more quickly, but it does impose a load on the system as a background task. So although it makes searches faster, if you configure folders to be indexed that aren't actually frequently searched, then that's inefficient. So as an administrator, you have to try and balance that. I would say generally indexing probably doesn't require a lot in the way of maintenance. In the demo, we saw how to configure services, configure Device Manager, configure tasks in the Task Scheduler, monitor and manage your printers, and configure indexing options.